G'day and welcome to the Genre Fiction Podcast. I'm Jack Roney.
And I'm Harry Colfer.
Let's introduce this week's guest. Born in London, Brisbane-based author Kim Wilkins is Professor of Writing at the University of Queensland. She has a long list of published adult fantasy, women's historical adventure, and young adult novels, as well as children's books. Kim has also published academic books about genre fiction, most notably a co-written book titled Genre Worlds, Popular Fiction and 21st Century Book Culture. Her forthcoming book with Helen Marshall and Lisa Bennett is called Story Thinking and the Real-World Uses of Science Fiction and Fantasy. So, Kim, welcome and thank you so much for taking the time to join Harry and I for a chat on our podcast.
It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Let's jump straight in. So you're a published author. Can we begin by you telling us about your own writing journey from when you initially decided you wanted to be a writer to your first published novel?
Yeah, the dim, dark reaches of history. There was never a time that I wasn't interested in telling stories. So that's kind of probably how I frame it rather than wanting to be a writer, because I feel like I was born with the full complement of human emotions, but I got this extra one called story. And I know exactly how that feels. You guys might recognize that in my body. It's this feeling of sort of anticipation, this kind of sweet little clunk of something falling into place really nicely. And I've loved that. I can't remember a time when I didn't love that. And so when I started reading, or when my parents read to me, and then when I started reading, I just always wanted to be in that feeling. And so I figured out that I could make up my own stories. And it kind of proceeded from there. And because I was always making up my own stories, my mother encouraged me to write them down. And then I would always be writing stories. And then people would say to me, "Oh, are you going to be a writer?" And it kind of, that's how it sort of came about. And it was in the 90s. I was in my late 20s when my first book was published. Um, so, and everybody was like, "Oh, wow, she's so young and she's getting a book published." But I'd been doing it for at least 25 years by that stage. In my mind, it just felt like a natural progression of, who I was. So, that's how it happened. I mean, in terms of how it actually panned out, publication wise. Like, I'd written for my whole life. I'd seriously attempted about maybe five or six novels. I could actually say 10, because I started writing a novel when I was 12, a sort of dire fantasy novel. Um, so if I count that, there were, a full 10 manuscripts before I sent anything anywhere. I kind of had a sense that they weren't good enough. And then I did a really traditional route. I found an agent, and the agent found me a publisher. So I don't know how common that is anymore, though I know people still do try to take that route.
Yeah.
But obviously publishing has changed radically since the 1990s.
Did you have a particular leaning in those early days towards a particular genre?
Um, yes, I liked books about headstrong girls. And I still do. And if that was a genre, that would be my genre. But there is no BISAC code for headstrong girl. So I get, put in other genres instead. But it's always been about the story for me. And I can honestly say, stuff with monsters and ghosts and or sort of, historical things, ships, anything set aboard a ship, I used to love. And that's the kind of stuff I still write. I don't see, it's a really long slog writing a novel. I don't see why anybody would do it unless they were writing about the things that really turn them on. And these are the things that I've always adored in books.
I really like how you framed it about it's not so much about wanting to be a writer, it was more about the urge to tell stories. And
Mhm.
incidentally, only this afternoon, I went out and did a school visit and I spoke to some grade 7 and 8 students and was talking about my YA book. And I asked the question, who here likes writing stories? And just about all of them in the whole class put their hands up and we started talking about what is it that that they love about writing and telling stories and creating their own worlds and so on. So I think probably a lot of us would agree that the whole desire to start writing kind of started from not so much about an ambition to be a writer per se, but just this inherent kind of need to start sharing stories. Would you agree?
Oh, I would absolutely agree. And in fact, I'm highly suspicious of people who say they want to be a writer. It's all about stories and connecting to each other through stories. And I've never, I mean, when I write, I do want to write nice sentences. It's not that I don't want to write nice sentences. It's just that that's not why I write.
Mm.
That can't carry me through a year of slogging it out on a novel. Like, oh, today I'm going to write a really nice sentence. No, it's stuff like today they're all going to get stoned on Midsummer and commit a murder. I mean, that's the kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that gets me sitting at the desk.
Yeah, I think for me, obviously, as a paramedic, the tradition of storytelling is something that just helps our psyche. You're always telling a story about a job you went to, and what happened, and obviously all of the dark humor that's involved in that.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, a lot of it is simply a way of us dissociating from what we saw or what happened,
Yeah.
by making it into a story, and then making fun of it, which a lot of people don't understand who haven't been in that field, but it is, that's probably, it was a case of, for me, getting those stories and starting to sort of put them down and writing them out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is one of the ways we make sense of things by narrativizing it, for sure.
That's a good word.
Or 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 even the way that we sort of there was a book, oh gosh, it was probably about 15 years ago now, called The Evolution of Story, and it was about the evolutionary function of storytelling. And the guy who wrote it, Brian Boyd, compared it to like when kittens are little, they play fight. And he sort of seemed to be suggesting that humans tell stories, especially stories about dramatic things happening, as a way to prepare for that ever happening. So in a way, stories, have this function of preparing us. So,
Yeah. Well,
mm,
in the sort of paramedic role, it's basically the opposite. Sort of, it's dissociating from what you actually did or saw. It's by
yeah.
making it into a story, you're then sort of like being able to separate yourself away from the reality, I think.
I don't know, Harry, that sounds pathological.
Oh, probably.
Dissociate, I'm like, dude, is that okay? Are you all right?
No, I'm not okay.
So, Kim, can we move on to now fast forwarding your transition into the academic world of writing? How did that journey begin?
Yes, well, so I failed senior year 12 back in the 80s when I was doing it. And so I had to go back and redo my senior in my late 20s, actually around about the same time I was writing a book and getting published. And so I didn't go back to university until I was I think I was about 27, something like that. Once I got there, I went thinking, oh, I'll do like something useful, like studying government or something like that. I think I was working at the time as a typist for the government. And and just for fun, in my first year, I threw in a course called Introduction to Elizabethan Literature. And I went to the first tutorial and it just like set my head on fire. And I was like, okay, I'm not doing any of that government stuff. I'm just going to do all, the quote unquote useless art subjects. And I ended up with a double major in medieval and early modern literature. So I went straight into an honors year and then a PhD. I had a couple of kids along the way, but I just never left. I just really took to academia. I especially took to literature, reading literature. I'd had my first book published, when I was in third year or something like that. And I just never left. At the same time I was finishing my PhD, the growth of creative writing at universities, I managed to secure a position. It took me a little while doing sort of part-time and contract positions, but then, once I was sort of fully on board, like full-time continuing academic. I just kept going for promotions. So now I'm a professor, which is really cool. It's very cool. When I first got promoted, I changed my what do you call it? Like, you know, my Mr., Mrs., whatever. I changed it from doctor to prof in my Qantas app. And then I was catching a plane and I just sat and waited and to be the last person to board, so they had to call my name.
Oh, yeah, I've always booked flights with my doctor title, but I've never been upgraded. I'm really disappointed by that. Always hoped that a doctor title would be useful in some respect, but
exactly.
no.
Is there a doctor on board? You know,
Yeah, at least being a paramedic is more useful now than I would have been as a marine biologist, because, you know, is there a doctor on board? Yes, but I'm not going to do much for you.
Exactly. So, I can come and untwist your metaphor.
And just as a question on the academic side of things, I know obviously my past has been in academia with respect to marine biology and science-wise. And I know that there's a huge emphasis on anybody who's in the university lecturing has to produce papers and publications and the like, and publish and perish. Does that mean that you, as a creative writing professor, have to produce research papers, or do books count in that respect?
I do both. I do both because I like doing both. You don't have to do both. There are other people that I work with who are creative writers who just produce creative writing works.
Right.
But I'm a highly curious person, and I really like academic research. And you know, so I'm on a Australian Research Council linkage project at the moment about the uses that regional communities make of new publishing technology. And it's just fascinating, you know, finding out about all of this life writing and this local history that's going on in the regions, and they're producing their own books and selling them locally, selling them at ag fairs. You know, it's a whole unknown side of Australian literature. So, you know, anything to do with writing, publishing, book culture, you know, how people read and enjoy and talk about books and create books. I'm on board for that. And that's where the Genre Worlds project came from. So that's, you know, proper academic research.
Just while we're on the subject of academic research, it was a question I had for later, but I'll ask it now. In terms of what advice you would give to people who are looking at, say, in later life, doing tertiary study like myself. I'm a late bloomer. I joined the police academy straight out of school. Fast forward 33 years, and I never had an opportunity to go to uni. And now that I've left the police, I'm now looking at kind of reinventing myself and focusing on my writing, and have only just been offered a position to study. So what advice would you give to people in a similar boat who may be in I guess it doesn't really matter what age or what stage in their life they are, but what advice would you give to people in terms of what options should they consider? You know, graduate certificates, bachelor degrees, masters, and the whole diverse range of courses that are available at different universities. What general advice would you give?
Well, I mean, I think people later in their lives, especially people who have had, you know, long and distinguished careers like yourself, and especially people who have already published books, I should add, can get alternative entry into things like associate degrees, graduate diplomas, and things like that. And if you do well enough, then you can upgrade those to, you know, a master's or whatever. And I think, Jack, that's what we talked about earlier, that you start with a graduate certificate in writing, editing, and publishing at UQ, and do 4 courses and see how you like it. And then if you want to, you can go on and do a master's. And from there, if you want to, you can find somebody who will take you for a PhD or whatever. Look, there's never a bad time to study. I think that, well, maybe there is, and it's when you're 17.
Yeah, good point.
I think that there's just so much pressure on kids to do really well in high school so that they can get into a course, so they can do really well in that course, so that they can presumably do that job until they die. That is actually not how life works, and we know it. And I just don't understand why people are still, and schools are still presenting this as though this is the pathway to happiness. I sometimes want to scream at the parents who come to open day at UQ when they say, yes, but what job will this creative writing degree get my kid? And I want to say, why do you want them to get a good job? So that they'll be secure and thus happy? Cut out the middleman, let them study creative writing. They'll be fucking happy today. So I think later in life study, as I told you, I didn't go into university until more than 10 years after I left school. I think then you know what you want. We do ask of kids a lot, study to be something before they even know who they are. Whereas, people who have lived a life and have something to contribute, I mean, yeah, okay, so your brain's not as nimble, whatever, you make up for it with good study habits, you're not getting pissed down at the RE every Friday and Saturday night, and doing mind-altering drugs anymore, that we know of. So I think that it's a brilliant thing to do, to study later in life. It's wonderful. And I think mature age students bring so much to the university too. They bring life experience and different perspectives. So
yeah. I remember from Stephen King's On Writing, he believed that you couldn't teach somebody to write. I presume you disagree?
Yeah. I disagree, right? I don't actually teach much anymore, but I can teach people to write. I can teach people to finish a project, and by finishing the project, they will learn to write better. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
If you're just sort of sitting there going, give me a guide on how to write and I'll follow it, and then whatever I produce will be good, that's not going to happen. You only get to the good writing by doing the writing. So probably my favorite thing to teach, I teach in the community at the Queensland Writers Centre. I teach a novelist boot camp at the start of every year. And it's just a weekend where you come along and I teach you a whole range of tips and tricks to get a novel planned and started. And then it's up to you. I never have to see you again. I never have to see the manuscript. But I say over and over again, there are things you can only learn by finishing a novel. This will help you finish a novel, and thus you will learn. So I probably could teach you, like I would love to sit here and say to you my 5 top writing tips or whatever. But it's actually the practice of writing that makes you better at writing. And so you just have to find ways to write more.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the one that we've been banging on about on this podcast is that, although novels are, maybe your goal, short stories are certainly a way to hone the craft because they're shorter. And you get feedback, you get sort of like that, an instant feedback, or not instant, but quicker feedback as to whether your writing is working. Because, it could be 2 years down the track and then somebody says, nah, this doesn't work. Whereas the short stories, at least, you get quicker feedback.
That's right. And I mean, short stories kind of differ pretty radically in terms of structure. A good novella, or a long short story that has a beginning, middle, and end, that'll teach you how to write novels. So yeah.
And Kim, in your academic book, Genre Worlds, Popular Fiction and 21st Century Book Culture, you take readers inside popular genres of fiction to reveal how personal tastes, social connections, and industry knowledge shape genre worlds. There's a term that you coined, the craft of genre. And I sort of spoke to you about this a little bit before we went on air about what do you kind of mean by that, the craft of genre. So can you sort of explain that to us?
Yeah, sure. So the book focuses on 3 genres. So it focuses on fantasy, crime, and romance, all of them broadly conceived. So fantasy includes science fiction and horror and so on. And romance would include romantic suspense, and crime would include thriller and that kind of thing. But we just started with the basic industry categories: fantasy, crime, and romance. And then we read a whole bunch of books and we talked to a whole bunch of people. And I guess by genre craft, I mean that every genre has its ways of being on the page. And we could talk until the cows come home about genre tropes and, what's in the genre, what's out of the genre. That's not really as important as how things are written, how they're read, how they're received. So romance fiction is really good as an example for this. So there'll be little clues in the writing on the page, in the craft of the writing, that romance readers will pick up on that a general reader won't. So they might see something like, oh, the male love interest is being rude to the female protagonist. And other people might go, oh, this is shitty. Why is he being like that? Why would she even like him? But a romance reader will be able to decode that and know that it means that he's falling in love with her and it's making him anxious and stressed out or whatever. And there's a lot of delight taken in that. So when we think about the craft of genre, we think about what the pleasures are on the page that are available to the genre reader that may not be available to other people. And a really nice aspect of that, and again, romance is a really good example of that, is what we call genre defiance. Romance readers know what people think of them. They know what the literati thinks of them. And there's something almost defiant in their attitude. And in some romance writing, there is defiance in the writing. And one of the good examples I can think of is a romance writer named Kylie Scott, whose romance writing is almost a bit over the top, and it's meant to be on purpose. It's a fuck you to the establishment. I think one of my favorite lines in one of her books was something like, he was so hot, he was lucky I didn't just attack him with my vagina. It's just so open and funny, and it's obviously meant to, delight the romance reader and give great pleasure there, but it's also a little bit of bait for people who want to poo-poo romance, for them to go, oh, this is the nonsense that they read. So
it's about embracing and owning it and really.
Yeah. So I guess when we talk about genre tropes or genre conventions, we talk about them as though they're sort of these abstract facts in the world. Like romance has a meet cute and a rival and a this and a that and a happy ending or happy ever after or whatever. But in fact, it's far more crafted than that, and it's far more I want to say sort of social. It's there's always these nudge wink almost interactions between readers and writers, and the really good romance writers will know exactly how to code that, and the romance readers will know how to decode that, and there's satisfaction and pleasure there far beyond just, is there a meet cute, is there a happy ever after? It's a lot more nuanced than people think it is.
So another term you make reference to, I was going to ask about, is genre communities. That's kind of what you're starting to lead into there, about different.
Yeah. So when we came up with the idea for the Genre Worlds project, we borrowed the term, well, we didn't borrow the term genre worlds, we coined the term genre worlds based on the theory of art worlds, which is a book by a sociologist of art named Howard Becker. And Howard Becker argued that all works of art, and that's conceived broadly, so from a poem to a play to a painting, to a ballet, whatever it is, all works of art, no matter who they're attributed to, are the work of cooperative activity, that there are networks of people at all times who are part of this art world. And when I read that, I remember thinking that is exactly how the genre community operates. It operates in terms of one person gets their name on the front of the book, or one or two, however many it is, get their name on the front of the book. But there is an entire cooperative network around them all the time. And some of them are deliberately cooperating, like, readers and publishers and reviewers and literary agents and all of those kind of things. And then there are the people who, print the books or deliver them to stores, or, who are less kind of invested. But the work of art, the genre book at the center of it, doesn't exist without all of the cooperative behavior that goes on. So we started to drill down into that. And that's when we sort of had that realization that genre doesn't just reproduce itself on a textual level, like in the book where we can see the genre tropes and we can say that is a fantasy novel or that is a crime novel, but it reproduces itself in the social stuff, in the communities around genre, and it reproduces itself industrially through the various ways that the industry functions to, publish genre books and distribute them and so on. And by far the most interesting part of that is the genre communities, is the social part of it. The research that we did involved lots and lots of interviews with people in those 3 Australian genre communities. It's just fascinating. It's just absolutely fascinating how they have each other's backs, how they all say that there's nothing hierarchical, we're all equal here, but it's not true. And just how books get made, stories get told because of those communities, because they're enabling, and they're supportive, and they allow certain things, but sometimes they also limit certain things. So it's just absolutely like a sociology of creative writing, almost.
And I guess you see that in the different writers' festivals or genre writers' festivals where people come together, whether it's horror convention or a fantasy convention or sci-fi convention, people come dressed in costumes and they set up their tables with their books and their displays, and they're with their tribe. They're with their like-minded people.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And so we do write in the book about the concept of affinity spaces rather than communities per se, but just this shared interest and how that's displayed. And cosplay is a perfect example of that. Like, sometimes I do go to things like Supernova and Oz Comic Con, and I love the costumes. And sometimes I'll see a costume and, multiple people are wearing it and I've got no idea what it is, but they're all displaying that for each other, right? It's usually Overwatch. I don't know what Overwatch is, but every time I go, what's that costume? Someone goes, it's an Overwatch costume. And I'm like, all right, one day I will Google that.
Can we move on to another topic that you also touch on in your book relating to the developments in the publishing industry and how, contemporary developments interact with previous ways of doing things in the publishing world? So what were some of the key takeaways from your findings regarding the evolution of publishing?
Yeah, so obviously things have changed radically, for multiple reasons. But probably the one worth talking about, because we don't want to be here all night, would be independent publishing or self-publishing technology, being able to publish your own books. And I mean, things really changed around, I don't know when it was, 2010 or something like that, with Kindle Direct, with Amazon's Kindle Direct, and people could just very easily make an ebook and put it on Amazon to sell. And what we saw, what the data show is that this was, especially in Australia, the rise and rise of self-publishing, largely driven by genre fiction and especially by romance fiction. Very early adopters of this. Romance fiction has this long history of quick turnaround, fast reads, almost, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say disposable, but read it and it's gone, read it and it's gone. And so with a sort of an endless appetite for more books. So it's not a surprise at all that romance fiction has been a real leader in self-publishing, which we now call independent publishing, because all of the stigma is gone, right? Do you remember when it was vanity press and, the very terms like, well, you couldn't get published, you must be vain to publish your own book. And now this is an incredibly lucrative for some people business model. It's so that is really interesting to me. And then alongside that Kindle Direct ebook thing, print on demand publishing, these books, if you can get a decent cover and you can do decent typesetting, they are indistinguishable. Again, that's a big if you can get those things. A lot of people don't, but they can be indistinguishable from the books that are being, printed, published, and then printed by large publishers. This is also a game changer. The general public, the lay person seeing a book, doesn't know the difference. They don't know if like every time I pick up a book, I look on on the spine to see who the publisher is, because I know all the logos, and so I can spot a book that's self-published or independently published immediately, but the layperson can't. And so the only thing that remains to be sort of, I guess, broken into by independent publishers or people who are publishing their work independently is the distribution question. And I think with online book retailers, like paper book retailers, even that is starting to be less of an issue. We do still sell a lot of books in Australia through bookshops and through big discount department stores like Big W. But if somebody wants to publish a book, see if they can get it up on a couple of the local online book sites, they can definitely get it on Amazon. Then all they have to do is make people aware of it. And, every now and again, there are these huge successes. So
that's the hard bit, though, making it the marketing.
It always was. It's been a problem and remains a problem for traditional publishing too.
Yeah.
And then when you've got the sort of sharp rise of BookTok, and how the algorithm favors North American books, it makes it just that much harder for Australians. So we publish our own literature, but Australians are part of a global readership, and global communities that spread out over social media and things like that. So we have a lot of input about the rest of the world's books, and not as much about Australian books. So.
And just extending that a bit further, where does genre fiction fit into the broader publishing landscape, so versus literary fiction or even non-fiction?
Yeah, genre fiction, there's a writer, theorist, academic guy named Mark McGurl, McGurl, who wrote a book that's name escapes me, or maybe it was just an article. Anyway, he basically puts the rise of Amazon squarely at the feet of genre fiction, because the Amazon favors, if you like this, you'll like that. So it favors comparison, reproducibility, that kind of thing. And there is an argument, I mean, I don't have the data, and of course the algorithms are all black boxes, that Amazon, which is, I don't know, maybe it's the largest retailer in the world now, I don't know, it learned everything it knows about retail, practicing on books. So I like telling people that, because it makes it sound like books are more important than they probably actually are. and it's genre books, right? It's genre books, which is how that happens. And so genre still, I think people confuse genre fiction and popular fiction. Popular fiction, technically speaking, should just be what sells. And there are plenty of literary fiction authors, especially in Australia, who sell way more than me. And I only write genre fiction. But genre fiction is, it's quite different, I think, from literary fiction. It sells differently, and the marketing around it is quite different. Distribution's probably different, especially in Australia, we've got a very large, very powerful, strong, what's the word I'm looking for? Very
robust.
A very robust, independent bookshop culture. And Australian literary fiction is, a very good fit for that. And of course, Australian literary fiction will get the bump of marketing from awards and from reviews and that kind of thing. Whereas genre fiction, unless you can get lots of good articles because you've written something that's startling, you don't often write something that's startling in genre fiction. It is, by its nature, probably a little bit like something you've seen before. So, yeah. But and for nonfiction, I don't know. I always thought nonfiction was an absolute mortal lock in the marketplace, but I've heard that market has softened quite a bit too. I'm surprised. I read a lot of nonfiction, and I read it with my ears. The great thing about nonfiction is that it's so suited to the audiobook format.
And there's a question, just to digress to a question that I'm burning to ask you, and something I've been kind of wrestling with. It's the whole question around fiction versus non-fiction. That question around what is it that readers love about fiction? How do they become so enthralled by fictional stories and characters where they know they know the characters are not real, but they become so convinced they are that what is it that we love about fiction? I often quote Neil Gaiman. He's got a quote that says, "Fiction is the lie that tells the most truth," and I often sort of use that when I'm sort of talking to people about how, the thing about fiction is you can talk about the truths in the world under the guise of fiction. And there's just one other thing I wanted to add. Harry and I recently were up at the Whitsundays Writers Festival, presenting up there,
Nice.
and I had an opportunity to meet the great Gary Disher. He's one of my favourite Australian crime authors, and
He
felt
was
very
one of
honoured to.
our interviewees for Genre Worlds.
Oh,
He
right.
was,
Right, yeah. So he's a
yeah.
very humble man, and I got
Okay.
to have a conversation with him, and on the same sort of crime writers panel. Harry facilitated the panel, and I was actually on the panel with Gary Disher. And afterwards, over lunch, I got to sort of ask him this question, and we've since communicated. And I asked him, what are your thoughts around fiction versus non-fiction? I'm kind of paraphrasing here. I've actually taken some notes of what he's told me, and I wanted to, like some people say, oh, I only read true crime. I don't read this fictional crap because I only want to know about real stuff that's happened in the world. With so many real life stories, why would I be bothered with fiction? And I kind of posed that question to Gary, and he kind of said, well, this is his words, and I sort of noted it down, and I'm paraphrasing. He said that people need to stimulate their imaginations to step outside themselves. And that's what entering into the world of a film or a novel can do. Storytelling is a vital part of life and always has been. Not that real life should be ignored, it's just that we all need to expand our inner horizons, and that's what fiction does. So, can I ask you, Kim, in a convoluted way, what are your thoughts on what's so special about fiction?
Oh, don't ask me. I only read true fantasy. What's so special about fiction? Well, I mean, nonfiction can do this too, but fiction can, I mean, take a leap into the unknown. And it's has a range of techniques for giving you an immersive viewpoint experience of a person who's not real. So, it stimulates your imagination, helps you see pictures in your head and, all of that kind of stuff. Nonfiction can do that too, but nonfictions are really, it's really very varied. Like for some people, reading a memoir would be as enjoyable as reading a novel. The kind of nonfiction I read is I like reading books about creativity and productivity and how people think and sort of like not pop psychology. Actually, it probably is pop psychology. Oh, it sounds terrible, doesn't it? And I, read a lot about politics and stuff like that. So and there'll be stories in them, but it's not the same thing. It's not immersive. It's not like, she walked into the room and she saw this and she felt that and, that kind of thing. And that's what I want. I just want to sort of have these wonderful experiences of being somebody else, I guess, and experiencing things that I don't ordinarily experience, which is again why I'm drawn to fantasy and historical fiction, because those things can't actually happen. Can't go back in time yet.
Yeah, it's interesting for me. The obviously my stories are feature at the moment, a paramedic working in Brisbane, and it's obviously fictional because if I wrote fact, I'd get in a lot of trouble. But I can actually give a much truer story to how things happen in by couching it in the fiction sort of genre or a space, because A, I don't get into so much trouble, and B, you can put things out there which would, if people saw them as being true, they would get really offended. But because it's in that fiction, you've got a bit of a buffer. And even though it may be truer than you would get in some reality TV or whatever, the fact is that you can get away with it by using fiction.
Yeah, well, there you go. That's a good answer. You can get away with more. That's fiction.
Yeah.
You're not a slave to the facts. Who cares about facts? Facts are stupid.
Facts.
And
Who needs
I
them?
think And I think people just love to be immersed in another world, don't they? It's a bit of a distraction from the mundane, And
Yeah.
often when I'm doing crime writing workshops or sessions, and I'll ask people, what is it about crime fiction that you love? And people will often talk about that they love getting exposed to something that they ordinarily wouldn't get to see. And as you said, Kim, by writing it through a fictional character, through whoever your protagonist may be, whether it's a detective or some other amateur sleuth, you've immersed your reader into what those characters are experiencing. So yeah, so there you go, fiction versus non-fiction.
And the fiction, the cops always get the bad guy.
I'm like, that never happens.
Yes, don't get me started on that topic.